Conservative. Constitutional. It's the Andrew Cooperrider Show, keeping you informed on what's going on right here in Kentucky.
And welcome, everybody, to another amazing day here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. It's a wonderful, wonderful Friday. I hope you're prepared to enjoy the weekend. I know I am very excited for the weekend. Take a few days off. I believe Monday is President's Day, too, as well. So it might be a nice 3-day weekend for some of y'all. But we've got a big show in front of us. Got some things to cover, very important things. Some pieces of legislation, horrible reporters, gun laws. Gun laws coming up again, obviously. Tragic thing happened there. And at that Chiefs parade mixed with the Moms Demand Action recently had their rally up at the Capitol this week, so we'll dig into that. They wrote a little op-ed about that too, so I figured it might be worthwhile for us to dig into that. So we'll have all that and maybe some more here today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. But as always, if you want to reach out to the show, check out past shows, head on over to theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's theandrewshow.com. But without further ado, let's dig down into it. So Alex Akisto. You may remember Alex Akisto from a prior show. Alex Akisto is the public health reporter for the Herald-Leader. Now, some of you may have heard of the Herald-Leader. Most famously, of course, the Herald-Leader right now is pretty well known for the fact that their reporters, as well as the paper itself, can't stop begging people for money while they simultaneously complain about how nobody wants to support local reporting anymore. Something that they're saying because the paper, clearly, based upon their behavior, seems to be struggling financially because you don't do a donation drive to a for-profit newspaper at Christmas unless you're having trouble keeping the lights on. But that's exactly what the Herald-Leader did this year. And, you know, I talk to some reporters occasionally at the Herald-Leader in passing, and I was on the phone with one a few weeks ago, and I brought up to him, I said, hey, you know what'd help your paper out? If you, got better reporters, like higher quality reporters that don't have a political agenda. You want to wonder why most people don't read your rag? You want to wonder why most people aren't interested in what the Herald-Leader has to say? I'm going to tell you why. It's because your reporters over there have a whole lot of bias that soaks through into so-called unbiased factual news reporting. And one of the people who's worse at this is Alex Akisto. And the reason why she gives Herald-Leader such a bad name, like a horrible, if I was the editor over there, I'd fire her now. She is giving them a horrible name. And it's because she calls herself a public health reporter. And generally speaking, if you're going to be reporting on public health, if you're going to try to take a factual claim, you better know how to read, understand, interpret data, and make sure you stop sharing with us useless pieces of information or data that's just wrong. Because when you share it out, whether it's in an article on Twitter or what have you, but as you're putting it out as a quote-unquote news source, you're claiming that you think this is true data. And if a 2-year-old with a thinking brain can look at it and say that doesn't make sense, clearly it's bad data. And it makes you look bad that you weren't able to figure out that that was bad information before you decided to pop off about it. Now, a little while ago, this came up when Alex Akisto tweeted out something claiming that there had been nearly 3,000 pregnancies due to rape in 17 months in Kentucky, ignoring the fact that there wasn't even that many reported rapes in Kentucky during that time, let alone pregnancies. And of course, this study was done nationwide too as well. You've probably heard about it a lot of places. And it didn't take long for people to quickly debunk the data because it made a whole lot of assumptions based upon a whole lot of data. And it basically assumed some worst case scenarios in every situation it could in order to arrive at an estimated amount of rapes that far exceeds the amount of rapes reported in order to then guess that about 5%, I believe that was the number. Yeah, like 5% probably result in pregnancy. So they guessed at how many rapes there were in Kentucky, and then they guessed at how many resulted in pregnancy. And of course, this data was quickly misproven. I didn't really need to search it a haul. When I saw the data and I simply looked at how many rapes were reported in Kentucky, I said, this is clearly, obviously false. And of course, this data was later debunked pretty heavily by quite a number of people. But that didn't stop Alex Akisto from tweeting it out. Well, she's back tweeting out something else that's absolutely useless. This time she was tweeting out a Mason-Dixon survey that isn't worth the paper it's printed on. Why? Well, it clearly is a horrible question to ask, and the data is useless because you poorly crafted the question. Now, why did Alex share this out in the first place? Well, Alex Akisto quite clearly is very much so for DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. You know, that word that the left loves, that the right's realizing is nothing but trying to normalize racism. But Alex really likes it because she's liberal. We know she's liberal. I'll give you a hint when they put their pronouns in bios. But anyways, we know they're liberal. And so and we know that's why she shared that bad data before on abortions. Well, this time she shares this out in order to support her claim that the majority of Kentuckians don't support Republicans banning DEI in public universities and K through 12 education. 3 bills on the subject are advancing forward through our legislature. And so she wrote or put out this tweet citing this data as a reason for them not to do it. She wrote an article about it too as well, or shared out an article, Herald-Leader did. Anyways, so this was the question for the data she put out. So she said, question, do you feel that Kentucky businesses and institutions should or should not be allowed to make decisions regarding their own diversity, equity, and inclusion, education, and training programs without government interference? Should not, 26%, not sure, 3%, should, 71%. This is an absolutely 100% useless question for this reason. First, this has nothing to do with the subject she then tried to wrangle it into. Because remember, the subject here is, should our state legislature be passing laws to ban government entities from DEI programs? It's not doing anything about businesses, but government entities. So if the question was, do you feel that Kentucky government entities should or should not be allowed to make decisions regarding their own diversity, equity, inclusion, education, training programs without government interference, that would be more accurate to the question of what's before the legislature. Of course, that would be a dumb question because you'd be saying, wait, should government be able to make policies without introduction from government? No, of course. That's like literally government absolutely is making policies. Like that's literally what it does. That's how it operates. That's how government works. So of course, but that would be a more accurate question. What's going on wasn't what was asked. But so the other problem with this is that even if you're asking, let's say there was even a bill before the legislature to say that the legislature was banning private businesses from DEI, this would still be useless. And you know it would be because think about this. Should the government should or should not be allowed to make decisions regarding their own diversity, equity, inclusion, education? Well, even far leftists would say should not. Lefties would say should not. They would say, no. I want the government to mandate DEI on people. And so would racists. Because they would also say, you know what? People who support Jim Crow laws, they'd also say should not. Because they also want the government forcing down their views on race and so on and so forth. Then as far as should institutions be allowed to make their own decisions? Well, yeah, I would say should on a private business. I hope you would too. Yeah. Private business should make their own. In fact, I would say should so much so that some people, I look at some of these civil rights laws, these gender, especially when it comes to these gender and sexuality laws, especially with how crazy everything is on the left. They're trying to harangue civil rights laws into meaning that you have to hire trans people even if you don't want to. I would look at that and say, yeah, the government should be leaving people alone on that side of things. But that, of course, is not something Alex Akisto would support. So, Alex, let me ask you this. If you would answer should to this question, and I would answer should, and we have two totally different views on what government's actual role should be in mandating things like who you're allowed to hire and shouldn't be allowed to hire, with the question of should government interfere in government, it's a bad question. It's a bad survey. And if you were a reporter worth anything, you would realize that this data is useless. Just like your journalistic skills where you went to college for this. Come on. A high school educated guy that went to AP Prob and Stats his senior year of high school shouldn't be able to look at data better than the public health reporter for the Herald-Leader, but this is the world we live in. These experts apparently go to school to get stupider. Well, coming up after this, we'll be going over some child labor laws hitting the legislature up for discussion. We'll be talking about that after this short break. You're listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. And you're back with the Andrew Cooperrider Show. I do have to fix something in my last segment. I was reminded by some people in the studio that stupider is not a word. More stupid, apparently, is the proper grammar. So I apologize that in my excited rant about how useless journalism degrees are because it produces people that can't look at data with any kind of analytical eye, I misspoke. I said a word that apparently supposedly doesn't exist. I disagree. I think stupider is a word or should be a word if it's not, but the experts in my office are telling me no. So anyways, moving now to the next story here. Child labor laws, bill passed out of committee put forward by Pratt in order to eliminate the 30-hour-a-week cap and 6-hour-a-day caps that currently exist for 16 and 17-year-olds in Kentucky. And of course, the liberals are losing their minds. You want child labor, yada, 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 blah, 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 blah. But let's dig into this. Let's talk about child labor laws. Here's the first thing you have to understand. What current child labor laws do not actually stop children from working all the hours they want to. They can work 24 hours a day, every single 7 days a week. As young as you want, like 3, 4, 5, somewhere around there, real young. You say, Andrew, that's not true. Labor laws don't allow that. You'd be mistaken. You see, if you have a child like mine, who is the child of a business owner, so I own a business. He's my kid. So children of business owners are allowed to work in that business, basically unferreted. There are no laws limiting how often, how long, what age, so on and so forth, that the child of a business owner is allowed to work in the business of the parent. So in actuality, this rule about child labor laws isn't for you, isn't for me and my kid, it's for your kids if you don't own a business that your kids can work in. Your kids are at a disadvantage than my child. By the time your kid enters the workforce, my kid will already have been working at the age of 17, he will have been working for 6, 7 years in an actual workplace, mopping floors, cleaning bathrooms, ringing people up at registers. He will have done that. He will have a huge advantage. The work ethic my child will be better than any of your all's kid that doesn't own a business. Not because my kid's better than your kid, but because the government has made it to where my child now has an unfair advantage that he will carry with him the rest of his life. He will have always more work experience than any of his peers, unless his peers' parents also own a business, because the government has given him an advantage over your child. I think that's wrong. I think your child should have just as much option and access to be able to work at whatever age you as a parent deem is reasonable, and the hours you deem is worthy and reasonable. But generally speaking, labor laws in general are kind of silly, but especially for kids, because there's another thing here. There's a few other factors here. The 6-hour caps is the real problem. 30 hours a week, not as much of a problem, obviously, of school, so on and so forth. But the 6-hour caps, where you couldn't have kids work for longer than 6-hour shifts, makes it harder on businesses, obviously, where maybe they choose not to hire 16 and 17-year-olds. Makes it harder on businesses to hire, obviously, younger people, even younger than 16, these caps do. Because honestly, even when school's in session, your child should have no problem, your 16-year-old, your 15-year-old, your 14-year-old even, should have no problem working an 8-hour shift of the cash register at McDonald's. Shouldn't be a problem. It will be good for them too, I promise. But it shouldn't be an issue. But it's been capped to 6 hours for whatever reason. So not only does this, one, prevent your children from having as much work experience as like my child, but also this is actually very damaging to at-risk youth. Go out there and talk to any of these advocates for at-risk youth. And I know a few, some specific ones that work alongside, that one Lexington and, gun violence reduction, things like that. And talk to them about this and ask them, at what age do these kids get into dealing drugs? Youth crime's on the rise. We just saw a bill pass out of the Senate in order to charge 15-year-olds or older that commit a crime with a gun, the same as you would an adult that commits a crime with a gun. Same crime with a gun. So we're seeing this on the rise. We're seeing a youth crime problem. And ask them, why, at what age are these kids getting into dealing drugs? They say, they'll get into dealing drugs, they'll get into the crime trade at like 13 and 14 years old. I say, how much money do they make? They don't make much. They make $100, $200 a week at the most. They just want to make money to get an Xbox, to play video games, to do those things. They see things that maybe their parents can't afford. They're not allowed to go work an honest job and get it. So instead, they start dealing drugs on the street. And it's not just my friend that works alongside violence and youth, at-risk youth programs that will say this, but actually Thomas Sowell, economist, famously has dug into this, and he pointed out how labor laws as well as minimum wage laws had a drastic effect on minority youth in inner cities. That other than parents not being in the home, them not having jobs and a way to make an income that's legal at a young age, because of course they see people having things and you haven't shown them an avenue to get it other than crime, is a huge factor to these kids ending up in gangs. Huge factor. So if you want to reduce crime, if you actually care about at-risk youth, and short of somehow forcing fathers back into the home, your next best choice is actually not to just cut away child labor laws, but to encourage businesses to hire kids to work in their businesses where they can. Show them an avenue to legally make a couple $100 that doesn't involve slinging crack at the corner. And you might suddenly see our youth crime rates will drop. Not might. Data shows it will. And if you really want to make a bunch of young conservatives, let's take this a step further. Is something a group of people, I've sat down with a group of people, we were talking about ways to, get government out of the way in order to create a better society. And one of the things, talking about youth employment and how important it is, and just how incredibly important it is, one of the ways we came up with is, well, what if we stop charging income tax and occupational tax on use in the workplace? We'll tell the employer, look, you don't got to pay the taxes you have to pay, the occupational taxes, the same wage taxes. So I have to pay like a payroll tax on employees that live in if they're in a county, I have to pay a payroll tax on that to the county. And so instead of you having to pay that employer, when you hire somebody under the age of, I don't know, let's say 16 or 18, whatever age, you get that tax break. But also the kids don't get charged the taxes. So if they go and they work, they make $100, they get a check cut for $100 until the age of 18. Then when they roll over 18 and they suddenly start getting hit with taxes on their check, you're about to get a whole bunch of fiscally conservative voters on your hands. They're going to take one look at that check and be like, how much am I paying in taxes? So not only will you be eliminating youth crime, or not eliminating it, but obviously taking real steps to affect it, real change, creating a path for them to get an income. But at the same time, guess what you'll also be doing? Be making a bunch of kids that grow up and realize how much they're being taxed by the government, and they'll realize this is kind of messed up. I am paying way too much in taxes. Suddenly you're going to have a bunch of conservative voters on your hands. A bunch of limited government radicals. Wouldn't that be great? Crazy ideas, I know, crazy ideas. But going into labor laws in general, I mean, while we're on the subject, labor laws as a whole are kind of outdated. They're kind of dumb. I know what you're thinking. You're like, Andrew, what are you talking about? Now, follow me here. Now, back in the day when it was physically hard to find a job, not physically hard, but you didn't have the internet. You couldn't, you can be sitting in your home in Kentucky looking at jobs in Texas and be job searching in Texas, right? So the job market isn't just local, it's national now. And you're not running into the situations where you have one employer in one town that's employing 80% of the town so they can do whatever they want, they can pay whatever they want, and what are you going to do, leave? That really doesn't happen anymore. Now, that used to happen. That's part of the reason why labor laws came about, unions and as such, but that really isn't the case anymore. Labor market's a global competition. So the laws have become greatly outdated, especially overtime laws. I think those are ridiculous. Now, you can like them. You can like the fact that you get paid overtime, and that's great, but let me ask you this. Why is it that just because you work over 40 hours for one employer, that employer has to pay you more? I mean, think about it. If you want to work 80 hours a day Well, you couldn't work 80 hours a day. But if you wanted to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you didn't have to sleep. You're magical. You can do that without employers having to pay you more because you would just spread out your employment over maybe 3 or 4 different employers. So the worker, you're not protecting the worker anymore. If the worker needs to make more money, wants to work more hours, they can opt into doing that by going to a new employer. But what you've actually taken away is the choice for that worker now to work those 20 hours they work at another part-time job at the current job they're working, which actually might make their scheduling system a bit easier. If you want to say a law that says, look, you cannot require anybody to work more than 40 hours a week for full-time employment, but if the worker decides they want to work more than 40 hours a week for full-time employment, then you freely enter into that agreement, then you can do so. Because that makes it easier. You won't have to find 2-3 jobs. You maybe could work 1 job. That's just a point, something for you all to think about. I know you may disagree or think it's out of control or ridiculous, but just think about that for a second. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. A lot of these labor laws don't. And if you disagree, feel free to reach out to the show. Email me at info@theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's info@theandrewshow.com. We'll be back after this short break. We're going to be covering just a few other news items here to cover. And then we'll also be talking about Moms Demand Action, gun control advocates throwing a rally. We'll be covering that today too. So stay with us. We'll be back here in just a few short minutes. And you are back with the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. Few items I want to make sure to I wanted to hit upon before the week was over. Few things. First, recently the Republicans Women's Club headed on up there to Frankfort and heard from many elected people. And during that visit, and I'm told by very good sources, that Damon Thayer, who, remember, he's stepping down as majority leader, was literally pushing, saying that Julie Rocky Adams would be the one taking over for him. Just outright saying, Julie Rocky Adams is going to be taking over for me. She'll be the next floor leader, so on and so forth. And let me just state once again why Senator Julie Rocky Adams, I think it's Rocky Adams, or is it Senator Adams? I don't know. Doesn't matter. Why the Senator, Julie, is so awful of a choice. Just absolutely horrible. It's maybe the worst thing you could do at this pivotal point in our legislature moving forward if you want to get done conservative things. Julie Rocky Adams is not conservative. She may be a Republican, but she's not a very conservative Republican. And I can show you receipts on this. You have evidence of, in 2019, she supported red flag gun laws. In 2021 or 22, she's on a podcast talking about how parental rights aren't under attack in schools and we shouldn't be passing all these laws. Of course, she's passed or abstained from a lot of hard votes on conservative items like some of these transgender things, so on and so forth. And she honestly is in a pretty purple district. So you can make a defense that Julie Rocky Adams votes the way she does because she's in a purple district and maybe she's the only senator who could hold on to that seat. And I would have a debate with you on if that really even matters, but okay, fine, whatever. However, one thing you cannot deny me on, one thing we can't disagree on, is simply this: that having somebody in from a purple district in a leadership role in the legislature is a horrible decision. Because when they're in leadership, they're steering the boat, right? And so when they're taking votes now, well, she's kind of in leadership now, but not as high of a position. But when they're taking votes now, it's only affecting her and her ability, she thinks, to stay in office. But when it comes to making decisions on what bills get moved forward, what's their legislative priorities, well, it will be coming from what's best for her. She's not going to be worried about the legislature holding on to as many seats as possible. She's going to be worried about her holding on to her seat when she makes decisions. And now she, of course, may warp this into making it about keeping the seats for everybody. She may. You may see that. But at the end of the day, what she's doing is simply making decisions based upon what's best for her seat, and then she's filling in her reasoning behind that. And while that's maybe fine for a rank and file voter, like I said, we could debate that. That is how you get good conservative pieces of legislation killed. Because it is true. As you get done conservative things, you may see Republicans losing a few more seats in the House and a few more seats in the Senate. But it really doesn't matter as long as they continue to hold great majorities. It's not until they start losing 3-4 seats in the Senate and like 10-15 seats in the House that you should really start to panic. And sometimes that's the cost of getting conservative things done. Because, of course, if you're trying to legislate to the middle, maybe you may stay in power for a bit longer, but what's that really mean? You're not getting anything done. And so I want to reiterate that if you're out there, you're talking to your state senators, make it clear to them you do not support Julie Rocky Adams as the majority floor leader. You're not in favor of it because you don't want somebody from a purple district in a position of leadership like that steering the ship. Okay, I want to make that clear. Here's another piece of information. The Kentucky Attorney General, Russell Coleman, is suing Kroger for the opioid epidemic. Reportedly suing them, it looks like, for $2,000 an instance, their part in supplying the opioid epidemic. And I don't know. So this is to their pharmaceutical. This is the pharmacy side of things that Kroger's getting sued. And not the pill manufacturers, and it's not doctors who are prescribing them, but the pharmacy who's filling the scripts. And I guess what I can gather here is that they're being sued not as much because they necessarily weren't prescribing the meds or something like that. They're getting sued because they were giving them too many at one time. So I guess if you came in with a script, so a doctor gives you a script for pain meds for 3 months and refills and so on and so forth, they would let you get just a larger bottle at a time. And that's what they're being sued for cutting down on the number of trips a person had to take to the pharmacy, which, we can argue about whether that contributed to the opioid epidemic or not, but it is kind of a little bit of a troubling trend. Obviously, when you have a pharmaceutical company out there lying about what their pills do, how addictive they are, so on and so forth, like what we saw, they need to be held accountable for that. And when you have doctors wrongfully prescribing this, knowing they shouldn't be prescribing opioids in this situation, doing so anyways, running pill mills, let's hold them accountable. But if a pharmacist is just filling a script that a doctor wrote, I don't know what your limiting principle here is then. If somebody ODs on non-opioid medication or even opioid medication now, but they filled that script at Kroger, is Kroger somehow responsible for that? They were filling up, did they wrongfully fill the prescription? Did they was the drug harsher than what was prescribed? If not, that's not what they're alleging here. I don't know. It just, and I get it. It's a cash grab in a huge degree. Kentucky recently has gotten hundreds of millions of dollars from opioid settlements that happened at the federal level. And so, by suing Kroger, getting in on the action, we're getting like another place to get some of that money from. And I don't necessarily see this as a great path we're going down, but that's just my opinion. Could be wrong. Once again, as always, I encourage you, if you disagree with what I'm saying, feel free to email info@theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's info@theandrewshow.com. By the way, to my listeners on WZXI in Boyle County or near Boyle County, if you go out and pick up the Tuesday edition of your Danville newspaper, The Advocate, you'll see an op-ed from yours truly, Andrew Cooperrider, wrote in there called How We Broke Our Government. I think it's truly a masterful piece of writing. I was talking earlier about cruddy journalists, and if they want an example of how to write a compelling opinion piece, they just need to go check out that article I wrote. You can also check it out online, I guess. But I think it's truly, truly wonderful. But in there, it's something I've talked about on this show. I asked the question, how is it, and I boiled down the numbers there in the article, so go read it if you're confused on the numbers here, but how is it that our state budget has billions more in spending than it's ever had, and yet when I ask legislators, LRC staff, Appropriation Revenue Committee members, legislators that's voted yes on this spending package, on this budget, when I ask them, hey, where's this money coming from? They're not able to give me an answer. How'd this pass the House? How are we moving forward with a budget that not a single legislator can tell me where billions of dollars of funding is coming from? And it just goes to show how broken our government is, hence the title, How We Broke Our Government. And in the article, I go on to explain that it's our fault. But don't worry, I don't just blame us for everything. I do in there, I do give and prescribe a solution for our problems. Of course, it's a hard solution that'll take time and involvement from citizens like any good solution does. So you'll have to run out there, grab yourself a copy, or check out the article online. It's called How We Broke Our Government. You can find it on the Advocates website, their Facebook page. I shared it to my Facebook and Twitter. If you're not following me on Twitter, it's at KY Cooperrider. And you can check that out, or just go out to your local newspaper stand if you live in Boyle County there, and go ahead and pick up a copy. Give it a read. You might enjoy it. Well, coming up after this, we're going to be digging into the Moms Demand Action movement. They recently had their rally up in Frankfort here in Kentucky. So we're going to be digging into that after this short break. You're listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. And you are back with the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics here in this final segment. Taking a look, I was scrolling through the Courier-Journal this week and found this article here from Moms Demand Action advocate person who was pushing out this Moms Demand Action Advocacy Day, which happened Thursday this week. And it was titled, "I watched my teacher get shot in 1993. I thought lawmakers would never let it happen again." And it's filled with a normal story about somebody's teacher getting shot in 1993 and why won't you just do something? And there was, so I kind of scrolled through past that, and then I got to support common sense gun laws, pushing out this mom demands action advocacy. And one of the things that it mentions in the article was an interesting piece of, I don't know, it was an interesting piece of data point that was so odd. So this is what it says. It says, this is an opinion article, mind you, but it does source its material here. Kentucky scores near the bottom nationally when it comes to firearm laws and near the top in relation to incidents of gun violence and firearm-related murders. Murders is a pretty odd term to give to suicides, but anyways, because a lot of those are suicides. In fact, guns were the leading cause of death among children and teens, other than abortion, in Kentucky in 2021. Gun violence costs Kentucky $9.6 billion each year. And now I heard that, and I said, well, the Kentucky GDP is only like $200 billion a year. That's a pretty significant chunk going to gun violence. If that can't be accurate. And so it does link now to its thing. So I linked to the gun violence costing $9.6 billion a year claim, and that brought me to a resolution from the KMA, Kentucky Medical Association's Gun Violence and Firearm Safety Work Group for further consideration, which was a resolution they put out. I covered it on this show. And in there, they mentioned this, but then they sourced it again to another source of where they got that from. So I said, economic research, let's follow that. So I clicked on it, and it brought me to everytownresearch.org, which, by the way, that is Moms Demand Action, okay? So Moms Demand Action is writing an article where they're citing a source that's the KMA, and the KMA is citing a source that's Moms Demand Action's own study. But what does the study actually say about cost to taxpayers? So it says nationally, okay, that it costs $557 billion a year in gun violence costs. $557 billion a year. And I'm like, God, geez, that seems like a lot. How did they come up with that number? And I looked, and this is what they came up with. So they had $2.8 billion in medical costs, which I guess that you could prove that. You've got medical bills, things like that. That's provable. $53.8 billion in work loss costs, which there is insurances and costs for that, so I guess you could prove that. $11 billion in police response, investigation, court administration, staff, processes, and incarceration. So $11 billion, okay. $0.5 billion in employer costs. And then here comes the big number, $489.1 billion in quality of life costs, the value of pain and well-being lost by victims and their families. So to put this in another perspective, okay, they're saying that the cost to quality of life costs, which is not calculable, right? That's just a number they made up. Okay, that's not an easy number to calculate. Quality of life costs. Like that's not easy. And how do they come to that number? Well, they don't really say exactly. They do say that, well, it's hard to put a value on a person's life, but, you know, it should be pretty high because they say in America, gun violence costs an estimated $489.808 billion annually in lost quality of life. That's annually. That's every year. Represented by the present value of what irreparably damaged when a victim's life was cut short or a survivor was permanently disabled by gun violence, with a higher amount for younger victims with years of life ahead of them. Pain and suffering. Estimate of the intangible loss due to either a life cut short or a person permanently disabled or by gun violence. So they said estimated of the intangible. Intangible means you can't touch it. So they made up a number of $557 billion, and the most of it, they themselves are saying, are based upon something they can't even point to. They can't grasp. It's intangible. They just made it up. So let's just wrap this back around for you, okay? Moms Demand Action, pushing out their advocacy day, writes an article in the Courier Journal where they cite KMA. KMA then cites Moms Demands Action's Everytown Research. Then Everytown Research's value that they cooked up to reach this billions of dollars they say gun violence costs Kentuckians every year is based upon the most of it intangible value. What you said? You said 480 billion? You know what? Why stop there? Let's make it $1 trillion. Let's just go for the biggest number we can think of. What's the biggest number you can think of? Anybody think of a big number? Big number, anybody? Yeah, multiply that by 10. That's how much. It's intangible. Who are you to say what one life is worth, sir? You monster. Ridiculous. But so that's what they cooked up. So you say, well, Andrew, that's just their craziness there. Perhaps we can dig in a little bit more. Maybe they're saying elsewhere. So I said, well, I want to see how they exactly, put this all together. What are they actually even pushing for when it comes to gun control? What is their common sense, whatever? And so I decided to look. And now first, I do have a sad piece of information for you. They do have Kentucky's report card. And they say that Kentucky is number 40 in the country for gun law strength, same as last year. Why aren't we 50? Why aren't we 50? I want to take that spot for the weakest gun laws we can get. You're telling me right now there's 10 states out there where it's easier to own a gun and possess a gun than Kentucky? What are those states? We got to get these numbers up, people. Okay, I'm putting it on you. I'm putting on you, legislators. Okay, where's campus carry? Let's lower that concealed carry age down to 18. Every town is only putting us at number 40. We need to be 50. I want to be in every town's mind, I want to be the worst state for gun control. Because that means we're the best state. We're the closest to the Constitution. That's what I want. So I'm sorry to say that is the case. So I wanted to go through, so I'm looking at their Kentucky profile. Now, here's a shining light. For their victories, okay, their last victory in Kentucky for gun sense was Kentucky Moms Demand Action. Everytown applauded defeat of dangerous gun bills this session. And that was back on 4/16/2018. So it's been 5 years since Moms Demand Action has been able to claim a victory in Kentucky. I am proud of that. Let's keep that going. Let's keep that going further. Let's get that number up there. Let's get that number up to 50 though in our ranking, please. So I said, well, what is their actual goals here? What is their policy goals? What do they want to see? So I went on over to their solutions. Keep guns out of the wrong hands. This is what they want to do. They don't want to take guns away from everybody. They want to keep guns out of their wrong hands. And one of the first ones they say is alert local law enforcement of failed background checks. Now, for those of you who are unaware, you can fail a background check without actually having a background issue. Right? You could be a federal government employee getting your security clearance updated, and you will fail a background check because you're currently under federal investigation technically. But outside of that, and we're running out of time, so I want to zero in on one. They say they want to disarm hate. So one of their calls is for red flag gun laws to be passed to take guns away from people who they think have dangerous biases. That's what they said. They want to take guns away from people who have dangerous biases. And then they wonder why conservatives have such a problem with their common sense. Isn't it just common sense? We want to take guns away from you because you think the wrong way. No, you're not really a danger to yourself or others. You're too conservative for our taste, so let's take your guns away. Well, it's clear that they're dangerous, and so they were up there rallying, so I want to encourage everybody out there, reach out to your legislators and let them know. Don't listen to Moms Demand Action. That isn't gun sense, that's nonsense. Well, y'all, that's what we have time for this week. Have a great weekend. We'll see you back here on Monday.